Hello and welcome to our webinar, Aligning Internal Teams Behind Your Brand Positioning. I'm Abigail Norman, Business Development Executive here at Brandworkz. Thank you for joining us. Just a few housekeeping things before we get started. I've put you all on mute so we don't have any additional noise. If you have any questions or comments, please use the text option and we'll do our best to answer them at the end of the webinar. Here at Brandworkz, we're really passionate about maximizing the potential of your brand because we believe brand is the best asset a company has. Brandworkz was founded by Jens Lundgaard, who comes from a background of working with several global branding agencies. He has worked on many large brands like Unilever, Seat, Sony Ericsson, KPMG, and many others. In his time at the branding agencies, he repeatedly noticed that when a branding project was done, and by that I mean great positioning, effective visuals, and a great message for the external, etc., the implementation of the campaign was often very chaotic and the project would lose strength and vitality. This made it difficult to get buy-in from internal teams. Internal buy-in is critical to developing and communicating a strong brand. In our experience, there are two key things that lead to the downfall of a branding project in the implementation phase. The first is having no online tools that make it easy to automate and implement the brand. And the second is having no central resource to educate and align the internal teams. Every company faces a multitude of challenges every day, and as many of us know, traditional marketing has gone out the window. We've entered a digital age, and our customers now hold much of the power. They have so many different platforms and touchpoints in which they can interact with each other and the brands. There are also many more channels to deal with than just 5 years ago. Marketing and branding is complex and requires constant and consistent attention to detail. There isn't an easy thing to do, and to be honest, there aren't enough hours in the day to get it done. I'm still waiting for a 30-hour day to be invented, but since I know that's not practical, as marketers, brand managers, consultants, and directors of companies, we need to think about how we can simplify this complex challenge we have before us. In a free webinar series, Brandworkz will be addressing the following key issues: promoting and educating your brand message to internal teams. How do you align internal teams behind brand positioning? Sharing and distributing necessary brand assets. How to free up time for teams to spend more of their working day working on strategic tasks. And then governing and automating marketing processes. How to standardize on-brand marketing material across many markets and regions. This half hour will focus on promoting and educating your internal teams to your brand positioning. We will answer the question, how do you align your internal teams behind your brand positioning? We will be sharing real stories from our clients and share with you how they align their teams to their brand positioning by tapping into our experience and by using Brandworkz. At Brandworkz, we believe that it is impossible to accurately communicate your brand to external markets if everyone in your company hasn't bought into your brand positioning. Before we get to the nitty-gritty, I'm going to launch our poll question, and I'll give you a few seconds to answer it. And also, so you're aware, your slides and our webcam will disappear, but don't worry, we'll be back with you shortly. So go ahead and take a second to answer the poll question. And while you're doing this, I'm going to share with you how Brandworkz experienced this problem firsthand. Our home market is the UK, but we have expanded into the US and recently started an office in Australia. Because we went from a single office to multiple offices, we had to sit down and really document and formalize what our company values and our overall aims are. We needed to take time to have a strategic sit-down. We needed to make sure we had brand guidelines and standardized marketing material that was on brand, but could be adapted for each market. We've had to use and still use Brandworkz as our own brand management platform to ensure our overseas staff as well as our internal teams here in London are aligned and educated about the Brandworkz brand so we can accurately communicate it to others and avoid them sprouting homegrown sales and marketing materials. The poll question, we've had 75% of you say yes, you've experienced the problem of aligning your internal teams. So hopefully we can help you answer this. I'm going to close the poll question. Hopefully we're all back. You can see us again. You can see the slides. As I'm sure you will know, a brand is not a logo, some colors, and a slogan. It's much more than that. It's the best asset a firm has. It's the competitive advantage which is hardest for your competitors to replicate. Great brands are holistic and have achieved high alignment on all their different marketing departments behind a common goal or a set of values. So for a moment, let's forget about our external environment and focus our attention completely on the internal market. At Brandworkz, we believe it's impossible to accurately communicate a brand or message to the external if internal employees aren't bought into the brand positioning and understand the brand identity. Otherwise, it will just become a hollow facade which will quickly crumble because of misaligned products and services, as well as bad social media reviews. Employees can either be the best or the worst brand ambassadors there are. It's critical to any brand success that the internal team be aligned to the brand positioning. As marketers, brand managers, and directors, it's our job to ensure our employees are the best brand ambassadors that they can be. I've sent you all several emails and shared with you the Eurostar case study, so instead of boring you with me and the same information, I thought I'd invite our CEO, Jens Lindgaard, to share a client example with you about how one of our clients has used Brandworkz to align both their internal and external teams. And now I'm handing it over to Jens.
Hello everybody, I hope you can hear me. Just let me get myself settled. Before sharing a client example, I was just going to have a look at what we call the brand alignment framework to help illustrate the main interactions between management, employees, and customers. So there are three parts to it. We have the brand believers, the customers. If they don't believe in your brand, they probably won't buy it. The visionaries, which needs to be the management, and the brand providers, which are really the employees. They're the ones that are delivering the product or services you're doing. So all parts of that framework needs to revolve around the value proposition of your company. So the management or brand visionaries, they're responsible for the creation and the vision behind the external marketing and the communication. And the management or the visionaries are also required to enable and facilitate the employees to deliver on those promises that are made into the external world. And then in terms of the employees, they're of course the ones who are tasked with delivering on those promises. And then finally, the brand believers, your customers or your client customers, they'll only become or remain believers if two things are in place. So the promises and the messages which marketing proposes need to resonate with them. I will come back to that. And of course, the product or the service that's been delivered actually needs to live up to those promises. As the saying goes, you can use marketing to sell a bad product once, but you can't use it to make people buy repeatedly. Management really have a twofold responsibility to educate the external audience as well as align the internal employees and the partners. And I'll say that the employees are almost the most important factor here because they deliver on the promises, not just in the form of the product, but in virtually all of the actions. You know, what type of person is being hired? Should they be favoring speed over quality? Are we going for the lowest price point or the highest quality? The type of customer support and so forth. So I'm sure many of you know all of this, but I think it's useful, hopefully, as a kind of recap. Brandworkz is we're a software vendor, so we are mainly part of the implementation phase of a brand or rebrand. But before going into the example, which is mainly around implementation, I'm just going to take a step back to the creation phase of a brand or a brand refresh, and give you a quick overview of what my main learnings have been over that in about 20 years in branding. So again, I'm sure especially if you're from an agency, you will know all of this. Essentially, as a 101 on branding, or creating a positioning for the entire company, really is what we're talking about, is understanding what is the primary purpose or the vision and the values of the organization. If there isn't one, then you got a big problem. But typically, companies formed out of a particular vision about making something better, either it's a product or it's part of the world, or a set of values that the founder had, or maybe some great innovation. So typically there's something, and anybody getting involved in that needs to obviously understand that, because that's what drives the whole thing. I have seen cases where the top management doesn't actually necessarily agree with this, or maybe they don't agree with each other on these things. So, number one is that if the top management isn't aligned as a start point, then that needs to be fixed first. And secondly, they also need to understand the value of communicating it effectively, both to internal employees and externally, because there's different types of people in a company. Somebody will be very product focused, some people will be marketing focused, some people will be distribution. But unless they understand what the common ethos is, then you're going to be fighting a losing battle. Then as the groundwork, of course, you also need to check with regular employees, for want of a better word, if they agree with what the vision is. So in a lot of cases, you can have a misalignment between what the management think is going on and what employees actually think is going on, in terms of maybe the values that they see in the workplace or the type of products they're producing. And of course then there's both the existing customers and potential customers. Do they agree with what this supposed vision and values are? Because they may see something different in the product, or you may have a great product, but they don't actually, if they're potential customers, they've never tried the product, then they may have a completely different idea of what it is than what it actually is. So clearly a key point. And if any of those are misaligned, then you really need to go back to the top management and say to them, you need to put in a plan over time in place to address these misalignment, whatever the area. So, before you get to any kind of visuals or messaging, I think everybody needs to agree that if there are any misalignments, then they need to be worked on, because as Abby was saying before, if the positioning that's promoted to the outside world is basically just a hollow facade, then it'll crumble very quickly. And then, of course, finally, we also need to make sure that there's enough uniqueness against the competition. If essentially you're doing the same as many other people, then your only differentiator will be price, and that's not a nice place to be, because then the profit margins are probably going to be eroded heavily, and then you really need to go back to the drawing board. But hopefully not. There's usually something unique about every single organization, and usually there's a set of people out in the world that will agree with that. And then finally, you need to distill those values, purposes, unique selling points into simple, clear messages, and also develop a visual identity that supports these. And finally, formalize and document the stories behind it, which will enable people to connect with it. So that's my 101 on a brand process. Sounded very easy, but it's actually very hard. The example I'll give is actually very connected with stories, because Icebreaker, which is an outdoor clothing company, have some great stories to tell. So the They're outdoor clothing company selling in 44 countries. They supply through about 2,000 stores globally. Based in New Zealand. It's all made from wool. And it's a highly brand-led business, and it's got an emphasis on communicating the stories behind the product. So when we started working with Icebreaker, they were turning over $100 million. So they're already pretty big, but they had some really significant marketing operations problems, or you could call them brand problems. So I'll give you a couple examples. So the sales staff were misaligned, lack of product knowledge at retailer level, inconsistent materials, inconsistent stories told by the sales staff. In this case, Icebreaker doesn't actually have their own stores, so they sell through retailers, but to all intents and purposes, I'm going to count those as internal teams because really they need to be. So there was a lot of issues that were holding back their expansion, and many companies after rebrand or a major campaign finds themselves in a similar situation. So if you just spend a large amount of time, chunks of money on a beautiful new brand campaign or new positioning, but struggling to align everybody across all of the different channels you have to the same story, then of course the investment will not be realized fully, and certainly if you have inconsistency, not just on the positioning but even on the visual level, that's going to kill most of your brand efforts. So in a widely dispersed company like Icebreaker, with retailers over the world, and also in small and medium-sized companies, it's quite hard to bring people together to make them feel part of a valued company or community. That brings us to our first point on aligning the internal team, which is make each individual employee the focus and give them the tools they need. So we fully understand that physically you can't give attention to every single employee. Of course, that's impossible. There's just not enough time. So how can we make them focus, give them a tool without spending all our time on it? So one way of doing this is to give the employees one central location where they can go and find all the information they need to understand what the organization is trying to achieve and how they're trying to achieve it. Everybody's busy and stressed these days. They probably also were in the past. So the management, as management, they or we need to do our part to make it easy to deliver on the workload. So for this to work, you need to really have something that's very easy to use. As an example, we usually make our system part of the intranet, so they don't even have to log in. So we're just lessening the amount of friction to get to the information they need. So central to Icebreaker's success in aligning their decentralized team have been the creation of a central web-based brand platform, which has become their central meeting place for everything brand. We call it the brand world, an online home for the brand and its community. Icebreaker's stuff is quite expensive. For instance, a fleece is about £150, so over $200. So being able to justify this price point is vital. The brand needs to remain positively positioned in consumers' minds, and this comes from making sure that the internal teams are aligned to the stories. They all need to be able to communicate the stories about where its New Zealand merino wool comes from, the sheep they use, the production process, the green ethos of the company, and the great product benefits. All of those things which clarify its advantages and differentiate it from its competitors. In other words, why should you spend over $200 on a fleece when there's another one hanging right next to it, which is probably around half the price? So, mind you, they do have a great product, and it has to be said, of course, that is the foundation of any great brand. I actually had quite a funny example of this personally. When I went skiing earlier this year, one of the people I was traveling with heard that we worked with Icebreaker, and immediately he shouted, "Sniff my armpit!" I've been wearing one of these tops for 3 days without washing, and it doesn't even smell. And actually it didn't. So that's obviously one of their unique selling points. Now, because of the high price point, it's essential to Icebreaker that all of its employees and retailers understand the stories behind the products and the company story. So that was one of the key challenges Icebreaker brought to us when we first started working with them. And that leads us to the second point, which is communicate your brand story to your employees through frequent and consistent communication. In Icebreaker's case, the portal gives access to stories which brings the brand to life and explain the high price, as an example, and the product. One such story, which is a great one, is that one of the first Icebreaker garments, worn by somebody called Sir Peter Blake, a famous yachtsman and winner of America's Cup, returned from the Southern Ocean after having worn his Icebreaker top for 43 days and 43 nights solidly without changing. Came back and said it's superior in any way to anything I've ever worn before. Clearly, a story like this is worth its weight in gold, if not more, in fact, to Icebreaker, because these kinds of stories really launch the companies. So being able to repeat that consistently over time, it just maxes out the value of that. So alongside is the technical information about the product, of course, the wool, the sheep stations, the production process, the environmental creations, all of that which helps build a picture of the brand in the potential client or client's mind, and justify the high price point. So they're able to have frequent and consistent communication with both the employees, partners, and retailers through this method, without it being a nightmare and costing the earth. So, a final point, don't be so externally focused that you forget about your most valuable brand ambassadors, which I believe are the employees, even if they got nothing to do with marketing or comms. So this point may seem very simple, but sometimes we get wrapped up in making sure the external audiences understand the brand positioning, that we forget about the internal ones. So as Icebreaker has done, they've created a fully designed platform with the company's own branding and imagery, so forth, and it's become the portal for essentially all new people that internally that comes into the company, or as an agency, to instantly educate users about what they stand for, what their look and feel is, and they can do that at minimal cost to the company and in their own time. So, just as consumers, when they repeatedly see a brand's image, they begin to buy into it and recognize it. Well, they buy into it if the messaging resonates with them, of course. The same thing is true internally. So the more brand material they see that's put in front of them on a weekly or monthly basis, the more they'll start pick up on it and understand it, and as long as they believe in it, of course. So if that's a new brand, then it's not so much of a challenge, because generally if it's clear to the founders what they want, they generally hire people that's like-minded. If you have a rebrand and you hugely changing the positioning of the company, maybe the old position wasn't relevant, or people don't want to buy it anymore, then of course that's one of the main challenges, is that people's actual beliefs need to be changed. So one of the keys to internal alignment is to empower the teams, to give them the tools they need, to give them a place to understand why a change is happening or what a brand stands for, what the aim is, and give them reason to engage with it. So to take a pull rather than push approach, so to speak. So Icebreaker draws in its people, into their ethos rather than imposing the rules from the head office. And just on that example, here's some return on investment from using our system, which is a combination of savings and revenue increases. Certainly the cost savings are in the hundreds of thousands, and the revenue increases actually in the millions. We're not going to take the credit for them increasing the revenue from 100 to 200 million over the time we've been working with them, but it's certainly one of the key elements that have meant that haven't been held back is a single web-based system for this. So internal brand alignment means engaged, productive and focused employees, and because they will actually produce and service the clients in the way that the clients think they'll be serviced, we have hopefully delighted and loyal customers. Not quite as easy as that, but certainly if that isn't true, then you certainly won't have delighted and loyal customers, that's for sure. So key takeaways: giving each individual employee a tool to understand it. Tell the brand story through frequent communication with them, and don't forget about the best ambassadors, which is every single internal staff, because ultimately each and every one of those will help produce the product or the service that the customers will be given. So I will, if anybody's got any more time, take a Q&A, although we are 2 minutes over time already, so maybe we will just take that offline. If somebody, we'll stay online, and if there's anybody that's got questions, we'll do that afterwards. So I will just leave you with one last image, which I love, which I think is a great story in its own right. You may not see it immediately, but in fact there are a wool factory in this picture, which of course are the two sheep producing the next generation of wool. Thanks very much for listening. I hope it was useful.
We will reply to email for all of the questions that you've asked. We also will send a recording of the webinar along with the slides. So we just want to thank you once again for coming this afternoon and taking time out of your busy day to hear what we have to say about aligning your internal teams to your brand positioning. Thanks very much.